Welcome back to Shadow Shorts. This is where every weekday at noon Eastern, I bring to you a short conversation with an expert, a thought leader, a doer in the realm of innovation for the built environment. My name is Jeff Echols. I'm a senior advisor and the head of marketing for Shadow Partners. And today I am joined by someone who is closely related to Shadow Partners. We'll talk about that in just a second, but I'm joined by Danielle Edberg. She is a go-to-market strategy leader in the AEC space, the construction space, the construction tech space, I should say. And she's also one of the mentors for our ongoing Shadow Partners Incubator for 2023. So Danielle, welcome. Thanks for being here, and thanks for being a mentor for a group of startups this cohort.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I'm glad to have you here. We were talking before we went live. There's so much to go to market. There's so many important things in the go to market process. And our focus in the incubator is customer discovery. And I think there's plenty of overlap, right? One has to lead to the other if we're going to do it successfully. But one of the things that we talked about being most important in those processes is focus. So tell me about focus. Talk to me about focus. When you're thinking about go to market, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And go, okay, how do we wrangle this? That's first thing that came to my mind. But when you get into the process, maybe it's for a new product or maybe it's for a new service, whatever. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you get into that, and how do you start to direct it?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, for me, focus is really everything. It's been really top of mind lately, especially as in working with Shadow and some of the teams in the incubator. There's a ton of new technology out there, right? There's artificial intelligence, machine learning, 3D printing, everything from like digital twins to metaverse application, and people are really excited by a lot of
Yeah.
this. So for me, I really like to think about what the real business application is with some of these things. I think there are a lot of different ideas that could be applied broadly across industries within AEC and outside of AEC. But at the end of the day, uh, especially for some of these kind of earlier stage companies that are kind of looking to find their footing and really go out in the market, how do you find the right thing to focus on, and how do you find what those real business applications are, right? So like is this something that is kind of the shiny object in the room, or is this something that really could somehow be put into play with the current business process to either optimize the process overall, someone's time, drive some different kind of ROI, or drive like a fundamental change with the way that they do business?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but there's so many great ideas out there. Um, and one of the things that I run into when I'm with my students, my graduate students, we run that class as an incubator as well. And we run across, well, here's a great idea, but someone else is doing it, or here's a great idea. And we don't have to take anything off the table, I don't think necessarily, but we have to be able to focus on something, right? We start with a problem, a solution, but who's it for? Like you said, we get into the market. Who's actually going to use this? Who's actually going to pay for it? And I see that a lot where we have, whether it's startups in an incubator or otherwise, we have people sort of ping ponging around or pinballing around, I guess is the actual term, and they struggle, right? And I think that hurts them in a lot of places, like pitching, um, working with a mentor. When you have a startup that comes to you and they've got the 50,000 different ideas, and I imagine the first thing that you're thinking is, hey, they've got to focus. But how do you have any techniques that can pull them in, or at least get them to start trying to wrangle it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the key to that is, and we were talking about this a little bit before, is getting that customer discovery process right. It's narrowing down, and there's obviously a number of ways you can do that, right? It's like looking at like your core expertise. What does the market look like? It could be who's in market solving this problem already. Maybe there's nobody. Maybe there are a bunch of different. It's pretty saturated, things like that. But it's really, I think, narrowing that down very early and testing it out and getting fresh perspectives. That's a hard one to say. Brought
Yeah.
in, and figuring out early if this is the right path that you're going down, right? Because in a lot of
Mhm.
cases, it might just be like, let's pick a thing, focus on that thing, get to all the people that we can talk to, ideally not people that we always talk to if we've been doing this a while or in the field a while,
Right.
and see really like look at the different levers for if this is a feasible thing, right? So understanding everything from, who the end user would be and how they would be impacted. And then it's really kind of important to connect them back up to who the buyer is, right? So
Mm.
the farther the end user is away from the decision maker could be a challenge that you want to think about as well. Like just because they're facing something in their role doesn't necessarily mean that the business sees that as something that they I guess that they can fundamentally change, right? So part of it could be if it's somebody that is for example, in construction, somebody that's out in the field that is having to do a lot of like really manual tasks. How do they translate that up to their decision maker so that they're able to feel the pain and they can really show that there's going to be some sort of value there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, maybe in a sense, or one avenue of this is in the realm of storytelling, right? It's how do we communicate this? And I think that's incredibly important, not only in that path that you mentioned, right, from user to buyer, if those are or user to payer, depending on how we talk about it, if those are two different entities, but also when it comes down to the investment side of things, it's how am I going to convince somebody? And we see that all the time. Well, I think it's another week or two in the incubator. We'll have a whole session on effective pitches, right? If you can't focus
Mm.
and tell this story and explain it in a way that the cliches are your mom or your grandma or whoever it is, that they can explain it, that you're in trouble. You're not going to get a an investor to write a check. The one question I want to ask you, maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but it struck me, there was something that you just said that it struck me. How much does purpose or passion play into this? You were talking about like market expertise or something. I forget the term you used, but I think about, I tell our startups in the incubator all the time, you cannot be at the end of this incubator, you cannot be the same places where you started, right? There has to be growth. You're doing this work, you have to put in the work. It's hard work, and something has to carry that, right? For my students, they've got to make it through a semester, with this one idea, and they've got to carry it the whole semester. So how much passion or purpose or something like that does there need to be behind it to keep that focus and to carry it as they try to take it to the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with any startup, it takes so much passion and purpose, and really a lot of it comes down to being in touch with the market and customer understanding and being able to kind of like understand, empathize with the people that you're trying to help, right? The people that are really facing these things day to day. And yeah, I mean, I think that's something that you can kind of test for really early on when you're trying to distill this information and like pitch it to the right people. I liked what you mentioned about storytelling. I feel like we could talk about that on a tangent for hours as well, but
Sure. Yeah.
especially with the new and emerging technology, the most kind of high level challenge is always making that something that's very complex simple, right? And
Right.
and I think that's kind of where you were going in one way with some of the storytelling piece is how like can you tell that story in a succinct way that kind of resonates with everybody that would be involved in this process. And I think um getting to that can be really hard, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the complexity that is required. But if you can't kind of tell your story in a simple way and understand who cares about it and who ultimately would be driving it from a customer perspective within their company, then that's really a piece that I think you have to work on early on.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, again, you mentioned shiny objects before, and there are a lot of them out there, especially in tech, of course. Um, but that's why I love the fact that we're talking about focus right now. Is there's so many aspects of this. It's getting it across the finish line. It's taking it to the right people. Um, it's several different aspects of the go to market process here. And when you mentioned, hey, let's talk about focus. Yes, that's fantastic because I see a lack of focus a lot. So as we wrap this up and we start thinking about maybe a big takeaway, whoever's in the audience, maybe it's a corporate that's thinking about developing or continue to develop their IP in house and deciding whether or not they want to spin that out, or maybe it's a startup um, in our incubator or somewhere else. What's one big takeaway that people in our audience need to understand about go to market, especially as it relates to focus?
Yeah, I think starting with the idea of focus could probably feel like it's limiting to some people. So I don't want that to be one of the takeaways. I think focus is really about breaking through in a specific area and then being able to kind of expand that. But just as important is the ability to scale that, right? So I think you got to look at everything from, okay, like we're solving this problem, but is the cost to solving its problem bigger than the value that it's presenting?
Mm,
And if that's the case, that's a kind of a whole different conversation, might take you down a different path. But really, it's like, okay, once we if we, feel like we're on the right path, we solve X problem that we decided to focus on first. What does that look like for us as a company in terms of how we scale and bring that to market? Like if we lead in this one area kind of as a starting point, how can we broaden that and look at different market opportunities, whether maybe that's building a different product, or maybe that's targeting a totally different market. And is that something that we can really offer in a meaningful and repeatable way?
mm.
That's kind of one thing that got me thinking about.
Yeah, repeatable is important, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, you see tons of I've been at companies where you see a lot of custom projects that are really cool, and they've taken into account some of these new things, but they're so specific to the business that is experiencing the challenge that it's becomes this real custom solution rather
Hmm.
than an application. So if you're really focused on the application side of it, it's, how do you what's the barrier to entry is I think where I'm going there. That's one piece of it. And then is that something that can scale across the board, or is it really going to be hands-on to figure out how to make it apply to all these different use cases?
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating really as we talk about focus that there's so much, it's almost an oxymoron, right? There's so many areas where focus can and needs to be applied, that it's sort of hard to focus on all of those. So this is fascinating. You said it earlier. We could go off on a couple of tangents, storytelling or others, um, with this conversation and talk about it for hours. But I really appreciate you joining me today for this short conversation, shadow short conversation about focus. And it's, like we've talked about, and like I've said, it's something that's needed and often missing in my experience, and it's something that we talk about all the time in our incubator and other places. So Danielle, thank you um, for joining me today and talking about focus in go-to-market strategy. And also, again, thank you for being one of our mentors for this cohort of the Shadow Partners Incubator. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I will see you in just as we record this. I'll see you in just a couple of weeks in Atlanta, I think, for a Shadow Summit. So it'll be good to meet up there, and we'll have our demo day for the the startups in the incubator, and having a lot of great conversations
Yeah,
around innovation for the built environment.
looking forward to it.
Right on. Me too. So, for those of you that are out there watching, listening, thank you. We'll be back again tomorrow with another Shadow Shorts. Thanks, everybody.